Hello and welcome everybody to a very special program as part of Astronomy Days here with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. It's good to be with you all once again for another great program. If you've been tuning in to our Astronomy Days programs, I know you've had a fantastic week. Today marks day 6 of this wild astronomy convention that we've been holding online with the museum. We've been learning about planets, stars, asteroids, space missions. Listen, it's been a great time. Make sure that you're checking out the museum's YouTube channel for upcoming live streams as well. And the Astronomy Days playlist has lots of videos from the past week that you can go back and watch if you missed any. So make sure you're taking advantage of all of that. I'm really excited to have you all here today because this is like I said, a really special presentation because we've got a NASA astronaut in the house, everybody. That's right. NASA is in the house with us here in the museum, virtually, of course, but exciting all the same. Now, if you're tuning in with us, you've joined us here on the Zoom call, make sure that you kind of get the lay of the land. I want you all to be able to take advantage of the Zoom features and accessibility options that are available to you. And so real quickly, I want to go over what we've got available. Now, everybody's camera and audio should be turned off at this point. So make sure that you have your audio muted and your camera turned off. Those buttons are in the bottom left of your Zoom screen. And there at the bottom center of your screen, you'll see a button for closed captions. We do have live captioning available to you right now if you want to take advantage of that. Click that button and then click Show Subtitles. And then you'll get the option to adjust the font size, things like that, in order to take full advantage of that feature. Now, for our program, you're going to want to see this presentation really well. And the best way to do that is to be in speaker view, use the button in the top right corner, and use the view options button and set it to side-by-side mode. That way you can see the presentation and our special guest astronaut for the program. As we go throughout the show, if you have questions about anything you're seeing or hearing, drop them in the chat. You can access the chat through the chat button there in the bottom middle. And it looks like some folks are already in the chat. It's great to see everybody using that feature. If you're watching over on YouTube, you can leave your thoughts and questions and comments in the YouTube chat as well. We have moderators in both places who will make sure that I get your questions so that we can ask today's guest speaker after the presentation. And with that, I think it's time to get started. Everybody, let me introduce the head of the Astronomy and Astrophysics Research Lab here with the NC Museum of Natural Sciences, Dr. Rachel Smith.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everyone. Good morning. I'm so excited for this talk and welcome to Astronomy Days, our last weekend or only weekend for this great week. So I'm so excited for this talk and I'll just do a quick introduction for our special guest astronaut and then he will take it away. So our astronaut today is Dr. Stanley Love. You can call him Dr. Love. He said he likes that Beth or Stan, but Dr. Love is good. He flew on the ship Artemis, the STS-122 in 2008 to deliver and install the European Space Agency's Columbus module to the International Space Station. He performed 2 spacewalks to prepare for the installation and he added 2 science payloads and he carried a failed ISS gyroscope to the shuttle for return to the Earth. He currently works as the deputy chief of the astronaut's office, a rapid prototyping laboratory developing cockpit displays and controls for Orion and forthcoming spacecraft. And we had a little chat about that. It's fascinating work about sending humans the next step to sending us beyond Earth and what that will entail. And he's going to tell us all about that today. So just a background of his education. He graduated from Winston Churchill High School in Oregon. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in physics from Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California. And he studied at the University of Washington in Seattle and got a master's degree in astronomy in 1989 and a PhD in astronomy in 1993. And lastly, I will say he worked as the capsule communicator, which is an astronaut who talks to an astronaut on Earth who talks to the astronauts in space. And it comes from the 1960s Apollo missions, that kind of role. And he is now the Capcom person for Artemis, which is going to send astronauts to the moon in hopefully this decade. And he also worked as a Capcom for the Space Shuttle and the Space Station. And I think that was it. I'll just lastly say, he's an expert in meteorites. He's done all sorts of really cool work. He has many, many accolades. I encourage you to go to his biography on the NASA website. And his total time in space was 12 days, 18 hours, 21 minutes, and 40 seconds. And he's traveled over 5 million miles in space in 203 Earth orbits. And here he's back on Earth, going to tell us all about why going to Mars is hard. So thank you, Stan, for coming. And please tell us all that you have to tell us about Mars.
All right. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Rachel. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. It's always fraught with peril on the telecon here. And if someone can confirm that they're seeing my slide. All right. Thank you so much. All right. 50 years ago, we sent people to the moon. And at the time, it seemed like we might be sending people to Mars pretty soon thereafter. Well, it's been 50 years. And we're still not on Mars. And today I want to talk about why that's the case. The quick answer is we haven't flown to Mars because it's really expensive. And it's really expensive because it's really hard. And it's not just that flying to Mars is hard. Even understanding why flying to Mars is hard. It really does take a rocket scientist. And here's one of my favorites, Dr. Robert Goddard. So my goal in the next 50 minutes or so is to turn all of you who are not yet rocket scientists into rocket scientists. And we're going to do this in 3 easy steps. First, we're going to talk about low Earth orbit. Then we're going to talk about going to the moon. And then finally, we'll talk about how to go to Mars. So let's start with low Earth orbit. This is our favorite object in the low Earth orbit, the International Space Station. 7 people on board. It took us about 10 years to build it using a bunch of space shuttle flights and separate Russian launches from Kazakhstan. The International Space Station orbits the Earth at a distance of about 250 miles. And this is a scale picture of what the Earth looks like. It's a ball 8,000 miles in diameter. And the space station is only 250 miles up. Some people have the idea that it's like, halfway to the moon or something like that. Nope, it is just barely above the atmosphere. And in fact, that's the only place we could have put the International Space Station. Any lower, and the little bit of drag from the outer vestiges of the Earth's atmosphere would have brought it down, made it re-enter early, and it was kind of expensive. We don't want to burn it up before we're ready. Any higher, and the space shuttle, which brought all the major parts up there, couldn't have lifted the parts up to that higher orbit. So we're sort of stuck with 250 miles as the place where we can put our big structures in Earth orbit. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit about what it really means to be in orbit. This picture is a woodcut from Isaac Newton's Principia, where he outlined his universal law of gravitation. And it asks us to imagine a spherical Earth with a great big mountain on it. That's there at the top. Of course, there is no mountain that is so big on a scale model of the Earth. But Newton wanted to make sure that we were talking about being above the atmosphere so we don't have to worry about air drag. Whenever physicists do anything, the first thing they do is they want to get rid of air drag and friction because it makes the math really complicated. So he imagined we put a cannon on the top of this mountain, load it up with gunpowder, and fire a cannonball out of that cannon. And I want you to look at the little curved line that goes from point V to point D. As soon as we fire the cannonball comes out of the cannon. It's moving forward at a great rate of speed, but as soon as it's flying, gravity takes hold of it and curves its path down toward the ground until it strikes the ground, say at point D. All right, let's try again. We're going to load up the cannon with more gunpowder this time, fire the cannonball out at a greater rate of speed, and this time it's going forward faster, but even so, gravity takes hold of that cannonball and curves it down toward the ground so that it might hit the ground further away from the mountain, now at point E. All right, you can see where we're headed with this. We're going to load up the cannon one more time with even more gunpowder. We're going to fire the cannonball out of the cannon. Gravity takes hold of that cannonball, starts curving its path toward the ground, but it's going forward really fast now. And you can see what's happening as the cannonball curves toward the Earth. We've actually gone over the horizon, and the Earth is curving away from the cannonball. So it goes quite a bit further than you might imagine before it actually hits the ground. And oh, by the way, the big guns on a big battleship, such as the USS Missouri or something, have to compensate for Earth curvature in their targeting, or they would always miss their targets. So for anyone out there who thinks that flat Earth is a good idea, never join the Navy. You're never going to hit anything. All right, finally, we're going to load up that cannon with even more gunpowder. We're going to fire the cannonball out of the cannon. It's going to go forward at a huge rate of speed. And as gravity takes hold of that cannonball, curves its path down toward the ground, you can see that in that circle that meets itself back at V, the cannonball is trying to hit the ground, but it can't because it's going forward so fast that the ground curves away from the cannonball as fast as the cannonball curves toward the ground, and it will just keep going round and round and round until something changes its orbit. That's what it really means to be in orbit. You see pictures of the astronauts floating around in the space station. People say, oh, there's no gravity. Nonsense. There's oodles of gravity up where the International Space Station is. If you built a tower that tall and stood on it, you'd have to be in a spacesuit because there's no air up there. You would weigh about 94% of what you do on planet Earth. You wouldn't even notice the difference. So plenty of gravity, but they don't feel it because the station is falling around the Earth. And the only thing that keeps it from hitting to the Earth is its enormous forward speed. So what kind of forward speed are we talking about? And the answer is about 20,000 miles per hour. Now, asterisk fine print, if you look at our promotional materials at NASA, they'll say 17,500 miles per hour. That's the space station speed over the ground. But if you actually want to get there, you have to lift your rocket against gravity. We usually point rockets straight up when they launch. That's because we want to get up above the atmosphere as quickly as we can. But it's the forward speed that matters. It's not the up, it's the forward. So we have to turn from going up to going sideways, and that costs propellant and speed. And then finally, we have atmospheric drag during the first part of the rocket's flight, and we have to compensate for that too. So 20,000 miles per hour is how much speed you have to gain from the ground, launching upward to get into orbit and stay there. And I must remind you that Mother Nature is an extremely harsh grader. If you only get 99% of that 20,000 miles per hour, we have a term for that. It's launch failure. It means wreckage on the ground and possibly funerals. And we are signing up for this class every time we launch anything into space. 99% is a failing grade. We have to get every single one of those 20,000 miles per hour, or we're embarrassed and there's articles in the newspaper about how badly we suck. Now, in the popular media, they make it look so easy. They say a head warp factor 2 or hit the hyperdrive Chewie or make it so, and it just happens. Yeah, we don't have that technology yet. Instead, we have, or until recently had, things that look like this. This is a picture of the Space Shuttle stack shortly after launch. And it's a very dramatic picture, looks really cool. It's also really misleading. When you look at this picture, you see, oh, there's sort of a big white airplane-like thing. That's the Space Shuttle. That's the cool part that the people in the cargo ride in. And it's strapped to a big orange tank that looks like it's sort of about the same size as the airplane-like thing. And that contains the propellant for those three bright main engines on the back of the shuttle orbiter. And then strapped to either side of that brown tank are two white solid rockets that each look a little smaller than the airplane. And those provide extra thrust to get the tank full of fuel off the launch pad because the three main engines don't have enough thrust to do that. Well, that airplane is an eggshell. It is built as light as it possibly can be and still withstand the stresses that it has to endure during launch and landing. It weighs about 100 tons. The big orange tank, when it's full sitting on the pad, even though it looks like it's about the same size as the airplane, it actually weighs 8 times as much, about 820 tons for the orange tank. Those solid rocket motors packed full of propellant, each of those weighs 600 tons or 6 times as much as the airplane. If you add all that up, the weight of the stuff attached to that airplane is 20 times the weight of the airplane itself. And all of that gets burned up in the engines and thrown out the back to get us this colossal amount of speed that we need to get to orbit. And once those tanks and boosters are empty, The dead weight of the casing is too much for us to carry to orbit, so we have to throw those away. The solid rocket motors would drop in the ocean. We'd bring them back, pack them full of propellant again, and reuse them. But that orange tank would fly halfway around the world, burn up in the atmosphere over the Indian Ocean, rain down harmlessly into the ocean, and we couldn't use those again. So 20 times as much mass as you want to get to orbit, you're going to burn up and throw away to get to orbit. And even with that enormous amount of almost, you could call it almost wasted propellant, wasted mass, we are using the best possible technology we can, and still we have that problem. So the heart of the Space Shuttle propulsion system is the Space Shuttle main engine. This is a picture of it. This is the best, that is most efficient, that is you get the most thrust with the least amount of propellant, most efficient and best rocket engine ever designed. And since there are probably young technical people in the audience today, I would like to present you with a challenge and say, this is the best chemical rocket engine that ever will be designed. I challenge you to prove me wrong, but I hope you do, because it would be better for the world if we had better engines, but it's not going to be easy. So the efficiency of a rocket engine depends on the speed of the hot gas and flames coming out the back of that nozzle. The speed of a hot gas depends on two things: its temperature, the hotter it is, the faster it goes, and its molecular weight. The lighter it is, the faster it goes. So if you want to make a better rocket engine, you have two dials you can turn. You can make it hotter, or you can make it lighter. Let's talk about hotter. The flame coming out the back of that engine is about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You can actually see objects on the other side of the gas coming out of there because it's so hot, it's not even optically active anymore. It's about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and that would vaporize any known material. The only reason that engine bell isn't slagged instantly under those temperatures is because A, we've built it out of the most temperature tolerant metals that exist in the universe, and we have explored the periodic table very thoroughly, and we are quite sure we are not going to find a new chemical element that can handle higher temperatures than we're already using. But even those would be slagged immediately under those temperatures. So we also take the liquid hydrogen fuel for this engine at minus 450 degrees Fahrenheit and run it through a bunch of tubes in the outside of that engine bell to cool the engine and prevent the flame from melting it. So we're taking one of the coldest substances in the universe and flowing it through tubes in that engine to keep it cool. And so you really can't cool the nozzle any better than that, and you can't build a more temperature insensitive nozzle than that. So we're kind of stuck on temperature. All right, how about molecular weight? Well, chemical rocket engine means burning. Burning always means combining something with oxygen. The thing we combine with oxygen in a space shuttle main engine is hydrogen. Hydrogen is the lightest element in the periodic table. We are never going to find an element that's lighter than hydrogen. So we can't have a lighter fuel to decrease that molecular weight, and we can't turn that dial at all either. Now, asterisk fine print. If instead you throw away the oxygen as your oxidizer and use fluorine, you can squeeze a tiny bit more performance out of a rocket engine. However, when you burn hydrogen with oxygen, the thing that comes out the back is water vapor. Nobody minds it if you launch a rocket that outputs water vapor 30 miles from your house. And it's noisy, but it's a spectacle. But you know that plume coming out there isn't going to kill you. When you combine hydrogen with fluorine, you get hydrofluoric acid. This stuff etches glass. It will get into your bones and etch your bones. It has to be kept in a special copper vessel where the acid attacks the copper, builds up a layer of copper fluorine salt that the acid then can no longer attack, and then it's okay to keep this stuff. If we launched rockets that put out, hundreds of tons of hydrofluoric acid, we would kill everything for a huge radius, and well, that's not really practical. We'd hear about that later. So you can use fluorine, but the odds are bad. So that's my challenge. Come up with a better engine than that. But you're kind of stuck in both areas. All right. Despite all those limitations, despite having to use that huge amount of mass to get into space, this is the kind of technology we used 50 years ago to fly to the moon. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. All right, here's our scale picture of the Earth, 8,000 miles in diameter, and we're going to zoom the camera out. and out and out and out until you can see a little tiny gray dot over there on the right, and that's the moon. And this is a picture you will almost never see in a textbook. This is the Earth and moon with the two objects scaled correctly to the distance between them. Usually they make a picture that's not to scale, so the Earth and moon both look nice and big and nice and close together, and that is a nonsense picture. The distance between the Earth and moon is about 240,000 miles, or about 30 times the diameter of the Earth. So you could line up 30 Earths in the space between the Earth and moon. So that distance is, rough numbers, about 1,000 times further into space than the International Space Station. So the moon's 1,000 times further away, but getting there is difficult, not because of the distance, but because of the speed you need to get there and back. And we're talking about flights to distant objects with crew on board, and we are quite insistent about the coming back part. So we are always going to want to come back. So let's add up those speeds. Getting from the ground into low Earth orbit takes 20,000 miles per hour. And again, 99% of that is a failing grade, wreckage on the ground, and probably funerals. Once in low Earth orbit, we fire our engines to increase our speed by a further 8,200 miles per hour. And I want you to remember that number because we're going to see another one like it in a little while. And that breaks us out of orbit around the Earth and sends us on a path that will climb away from the Earth out toward the moon. Once you get to the moon, you have a choice. You can either hit it or fly by it, and neither of those are what we want. We want to stay. And since we don't want to hit the moon, we have to fire our engines again to slow down, kill off some of that speed that we just got with great expense in order to go into orbit around the moon. Once in orbit around the moon now, we have to come down, and that means we have to kill off our forward speed for the orbit around the moon, which is about 3,900 miles per hour. Now, we don't want to just stop in orbit and let gravity pull us straight down so that we hit, because we will make a resounding splat, and that will be embarrassing. So we need to slow down gently, and that means supporting the weight of our lander for a few minutes while we hover and gently slow down to touchdown. This is a picture of actually Neil Armstrong in the 1960s flying this special trainer vehicle we built so that the astronauts could practice their lunar landings. That's a jet engine in the center of that frame. And actually, one time this thing crashed and Neil had to eject, but he landed safely and went home to his family that night. And that's a good thing because later he went to the moon. Once on the surface, we can do the fun stuff. We can plant the flag. We can say inspirational words. We can pick up a few rocks. We can play a round of golf, and that doesn't cost us any propellant. Now we want to come home, and that means we have to do everything we just did, but in reverse. First, we have to support the weight of our spaceship as we launch off the surface of the moon. This is a picture taken by a remote camera. The little blob in the center is the Apollo ascent module flying away from the descent module, which served as its launch platform, and we left that on the moon. 700 miles per hour, and if you fail in this, you crash on the surface and perish. Once safely away from the moon's surface, you have to pick up orbital speed to get back into orbit around the moon, 3,900 miles per hour. If you fail in this, you crash on the surface and perish. You may be noticing a theme here. Once in low lunar orbit, we have to fire our engines again to break out of low lunar orbit and head back toward the Earth. If we fail in this, we remain trapped in low Earth orbit until our food, water, and air run out and we perish. After a cruise period back to the Earth, nature finally cuts us a break. We do not need to fire our engines to slow down when we get to the Earth. Instead, the Earth has a nice thick atmosphere. If we put a heat shield on our capsule, we can use air drag against that atmosphere to slow down. By the way, the temperatures of the gas on the leading edge of that heat shield as we come in at 7 miles per second is like 18,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat shield itself, 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is actually a picture from the ground of a returning Apollo capsule, leaving this 100-mile-long trail of flame behind it as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. And then finally, when we land, that nice thick atmosphere also provides enough drag for parachutes. And we also have an Earth that's 70% covered with water, which is a nice soft thing to land on. So we can put out parachutes and land in the water safely, and we don't have to burn any propellant. So let's add up all those speeds we had to do to get to the moon. And the answer is 42,000 miles per hour, twice the amount of velocity it took just to get us into low Earth orbit. And remember, every time you burn those engines, you throw away an immense amount of propellant, and then you have to throw away the empty tank because you can't afford to take it with you. And that is why of this 360-foot tall rocket that we had on the launch pad in Florida, the only thing we got back was that little tiny cone on the top. All the rest got burnt up and thrown away. Now, for a trip to the moon, that little tiny cone is not a bad thing. It weighed about 6 tons, and into that we were able to pack our 3 intrepid explorers. During a 1-week trip to the moon and back, they would breathe up about 33 scuba cylinders worth of oxygen. We actually carried the oxygen in liquid form in the service module. We didn't actually carry 33 scuba bottles. 3 people for a week are going to drink up about 4 of those big 5-gallon jugs of drinking water that you can see in the office water cooler. And 3 people for a week is going to eat up about 1 grocery cart worth of food. And that all fits pretty well into a 6-ton capsule. But I want you to remember this picture because we're going to see another one like it later. All right, now we have proven our mettle with a trip to the moon and back. Let's talk about Mars. And the first thing we're going to do is total up the speeds it takes to get to Mars and back. So launch into low Earth orbit, 20,000 miles per hour as we're used to. Once in low Earth orbit, we burn our engines to break out of low Earth orbit and send ourselves on the way to Mars, 9,000 miles per hour. Remember what it was to get back to the moon? Just 8,200 miles per hour. Only 10% more speed from low Earth orbit takes you not just to the moon, but all the way to Mars. Very interesting the way orbital mechanics works, but that is a fact. After a substantial cruise period, which we'll talk about in a minute, we arrive at Mars and nature cuts us a break. Mars has a thin atmosphere, but it's thick enough for us to use a heat shield to slow down from our cosmic approach speed so that we can trap into Mars orbit or enter directly to the ground without having to burn any propellant. However, that atmosphere is too thin to land using a parachute for anything larger than, say, a small rover. If we have a big lander with people in it, we cannot use a parachute to slow down because we will hit the surface at 1 kilometer per second or something like that and make a new crater, and that will be embarrassing. We don't want to do that. So we have to support the weight of our lander using its engine to land softly. And because Mars's gravity is stronger than the moon's gravity, that takes more propellant, about 2,000 miles per hour worth of propellant to land softly. Once we're on the surface, we can do the fun stuff. We can plant the flags because we cannot pay for this ourselves. It's going to be an international effort. We're going to thank our corporate partners because they're going to have to help us pay for it too. We can do geology. We can look for life. We can make stuff out of the materials that we find there. All well and good, but it doesn't cost us any propellant. Now we want to come home. And remember, when we launch out of Florida, we have a team of thousands of dedicated professionals preparing our spacecraft for launch. The small team of astronauts on Mars who are preparing to launch off a planet to come back to Earth will have to do all that work themselves. I sure hope that's a fairly simple rocket because we only have a few people and a short amount of time to get that done. So launching off of Mars and breaking away from Mars to send you back to Earth, those two things together cost you about 17,000 miles per hour worth of propellant, comparable to getting to low Earth orbit. So this is going to take a big spacecraft. It's a big launch. You're going to burn up a lot of propellant to get there. Once on the way back to Earth, after a substantial cruise period, we arrive back at Earth. We're coming back from Mars now, not just from the moon. So we're going to re-enter the atmosphere faster. We need a little bit better heat shield, but we can still use the atmosphere to aerobrake, slow down, and we don't have to burn any propellant. And then again, the Earth has a nice thick atmosphere. We can land under parachutes. This is actually a photograph of the parachute testing for a prototype of our Orion capsule that's going to be taking crews to the moon here starting in a couple of years, and that we're going to fly without people on board for a test flight in 2 months. So I highly recommend you watch that because it's going to be really, really cool. So we can land on parachutes. It doesn't cost us any propellant. And when you add up all the prop to get to the Mars and back, 48,000 miles per hour total. Remember what it was to get to the moon, 42,000 miles per hour. It only takes 15% more rocket capability to get to Mars and back than it took to get to the moon and back. 15%, yet it's been 50 years and we haven't been able to do it. And the reason for that is it ain't the speed, it's the distance. And we're going to talk about that for a moment here. Here's our picture of the Earth-Moon system to scale, 240,000 miles between the Earth and Mars. And we're going to zoom the camera out and out and out and out And now it's getting kind of hard to see the moon. So I'm going to draw a circle. This dotted white line represents the orbit of the moon around the Earth. 240,000 miles in radius, about 500,000 miles in diameter. And that gives us a point of reference because we're going to have to continue zooming the camera out and out and out and out and out. And now it's getting kind of hard to see that little tiny circle that's the orbit of the moon around the Earth. So I'm going to add some more reference marks. Blue dashed line represents the orbit of the Earth around the sun. Yellow dashed line represents the orbit of the planet Venus around the sun. Every couple of years, Venus laps us, comes in between the sun and us, and actually it came directly between the sun and us in 2012. And if you were in a good place with the right eye protection, you could see this little circle crawling across the face of the sun, and that was the planet Venus. 26 million miles between the two planets at that closest approach. And we're going to keep zooming the camera out and out. The orbit of Mercury now coming into view on the left there, that orange dashed line, and out and out. Now I'm going to put a little symbol representing the sun. The sun is much tinier than this symbol on to scale, so it's a marker. The sun is not that big, and you can see that by now the orbit of the moon around the Earth is just invisibly tiny. We can't even see it at this scale. And we're going to keep zooming the camera out and out and out. Now the red dashed line represents the orbit of the planet Mars, and the whole inner solar system is about at this scale, but we sure had to zoom the camera out a lot, didn't we? So I'm going to declutter Mercury and Venus because we're not going to talk about those, and we're going to put some measurements on this map so that we can talk about it in proper scientific terms. Blue dashed line represents the orbit of the Earth around the sun with a radius of, on average, about 93 million miles. The Earth goes around counterclockwise as indicated by the blue arrow. It takes 12 months for the Earth to go around. Red dashed line represents the orbit of Mars around the Earth. Again, the planet's too tiny to see at this scale. The red arrow indicates that Mars moves around counterclockwise as seen from a vantage point above the North Pole of the sun. Average radius of Mars' orbit about 140 million miles. Asterisk fine print. Mars' orbit is really lopsided. It is quite elliptical. It would actually show up on this scale, but I've kept it as a circle for simplicity's sake. And it takes Mars about 22.5 months to go around the sun. Now, we're talking now about a trip scale of hundreds of millions of miles, or 1,000 times further into space than the moon, or 1,000,000 times further into space than the space station. 1,000,000 times further. Getting the space station is pretty hard. Mars is 1,000,000 times further. So, however, Mars is a long way away. However, the Earth laps Mars every couple of years. Why not just wait until the closest approach and then fly over there, plant your flag, and then fly back? And the answer is we can't do it that way because that would take performance of about 250,000 miles per hour. The numbers I showed you earlier were assuming the most fuel efficient possible trajectory. There is no propulsion system we have now or on the drawing boards that can get us at 250,000 miles per hour. We do not have warp drive. We cannot go that way. Instead, what we have to use is a transfer orbit. So this is an imaginary orbit. You know, you can imagine an orbit of various sizes and shapes. This is an ellipse around the sun that just barely kisses the orbit of the Earth when it's at its closest point to the sun, just barely kisses the orbit of Mars when it's at its further point from the sun at 140 million miles. And if you put something on that orbit, it will take about 17 months to go around. And again, at its closest point to the sun, it's 93 million miles from the sun, the same distance as the Earth. At its furthest point from the sun, it's 140 million miles from the sun, about the same distance as Mars. And, with the right propulsion, we can put anything on any orbit we can imagine. And this is a good one. And this is our fuel efficient transfer to Mars. So just a note of warning. Once you have burned your engines to leave Earth and are coasting out toward Mars, there is no propulsion system that we can imagine or build or imagine that will allow us to say, oh, you know what, change my mind. I want to come home early. And that we call that a mission abort. And there are no aborts once you have left Earth. There is no way that you can catch back up to the Earth once you've left it. No boomerang flights in Antarctic parlance. So with that in mind, let's see what it takes to fly to Mars. Blue dashed line represents the orbit of Earth around the sun. Blue dot represents the position of Earth, remembering that the Earth itself is far too small to see at this scale. Red dashed line indicates the orbit of Mars around the sun. Red dot indicates the position of Mars. The planet itself is too tiny at this scale. White dashed line indicates our transfer orbit for our spacecraft. White dot marks the location of the spacecraft, and it is way, 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 way too tiny to see at this scale. So we're going to set the planets and the spacecraft in motion, and we're going to count months down in the lower right. So here we go. We start actually by leaving Earth and then burning our engines to speed up so that we leave the Earth behind in its orbit. As we speed up and pull away from the Earth, our excess speed makes us start climbing up away from the sun. You can imagine a marble rolling around in a salad bowl, and giving it a little extra kick makes it climb up the wall of the salad bowl a little further. As the spaceship leaves Earth, it gets further from the sun, it actually starts slowing down, so that 5 months after, even though we started going faster than the Earth passes us as we slow down and we gradually approach the orbit of Mars. Oh dear, we're at the orbit of Mars. And in the newspaper, when you read the orbit of Mars, they frequently confuse this with Mars orbit. Not the same thing. Orbit of Mars means the path of our Mars around the sun. Mars orbit would be a nice orbit around Mars, and that's where we want to be, but you can see that the planet Mars is so 80 million miles away from us, and we have utterly missed the planet. And that is super embarrassing, but wait, it gets worse. I'm on an orbit just like an asteroid. I'm going to continue on that elliptical path. I don't have a planet there that I can use to slow down, so I'm going to gradually start returning back toward the sun. As I roll back down the wall of the salad bowl, I pick up speed. I'm approaching the orbit of the Earth. Oh dear. Well, 17 months later, I've completed one transfer orbit around the sun. I've returned to the orbit of the Earth. The Earth itself is almost on the opposite side of the sun, 170 million miles away. I have no chance to land. I'm going to continue circling the sun on that elliptical orbit until I run out of food, water, and air and perish. Well, that didn't go so well. So we're going to try again, and this time we're going to be smart. Just as the Earth and Mars go around the sun, different speeds on different sized tracks. The Earth moves faster, its track is smaller. Mars moves slower, its track is bigger. Every once in a while, the planets will line up in whatever configuration you want, and it turns out that if you wait until Mars is about 40 degrees ahead of the Earth in its orbit, you can throw this 8.5-month Hail Mary pass to a moving wide receiver and have the ball and the receiver arrive at the same point at the same time. So here we go. We are going to count months. We launch. We pull ahead of the Earth because we have excess speed. We roll up the wall of the salad bowl. We slow down as we go. The Earth passes us. We're now approaching the orbit of Mars. We're slowing down further. Mars is catching up from behind us. And oh, we did it. 8.5 months after launch, we have arrived at the orbit of Mars, and Mars itself is there. And now we are heroes. And by the way, every time we send a probe to Mars, you know, a rover, a helicopter, an orbiter, that's the Hail Mary pass we have to throw. We have to wait until a specific time, which happens about every 26 months, when the Earth and Mars are in just the right alignment so that you can throw something from the Earth to Mars. So we've arrived at Mars. We land, we plant the flags, we thank our corporate partners, we grab some rocks, we look for life, we get back on our capsule and we come home because shorter space missions are always safer. And we get back on our transfer orbit and we let Mars pull away from us. We slow down and then speed up as we come down the salad bowl, picking up speed until we come to the, oh, we got to the orbit of the Earth. That's good, right? Except the Earth is on the other side of the sun and 170 million miles away. We have no chance to land. We're going to continue circling the sun on our heroic transfer orbit until we run out of air, food, and water and perish. Okay, well, that didn't work either. So, golly, this is complicated, isn't it? All right, we're going to try one more time. We're going to go to Congress and say, can we please have some more money? And we're going to really, really do it right this time, I promise. So we wait till Mars is 40 degrees ahead of the Earth in its orbit. We launch off of Earth. We have excess speed from our engines. We climb up the wall of the salad bowl. We slow down as we go. We are approaching the orbit of Mars, going pretty slow. Mars catches up from behind us. Now, we have arrived at Mars, and this time we're going to be smart. Even as we had to wait for the right time to leave Earth for Mars, we have to wait for the right time to leave Mars for Earth. And if you have to wait in space, the best place to wait is on a planet. The planet underneath your feet does not emit radiation the way all of space does. So you have 50% shielding from space radiation if you're on a planet. Also, Mars has cool stuff to do. We can look for life, we can do geology, we can make stuff out of the resources there. So if we have to wait, the planet is the best place to do that. So we're going to wait on Mars until the planets line up so that we can return. And we're going to wait and wait and wait. Golly, I sure hope you have a lot to do, because you're going to wait, and wait, and wait until almost 2 years after you left Earth. The planets are now in an alignment that's suitable so that I can make the same transfer orbit I used to get out to Mars, except clocked around differently so that it lines up with where Mars is now and where Earth is going to be when I get there. And now I can leave Mars. I can roll down the wall of the salad bowl, picking up speed. I'm actually going to catch up with the Earth from behind until 32 months, almost 3 years after I left. I have arrived at Earth's orbit when the Earth is there, and I'm safely home at last. 32 months. And there is not much we can do to speed that up. Now, asterisk fine print, you can do fancy trajectories that swing in by Venus and use planetary gravity assist. It turns out that speeds it up slightly, uses a lot more propellant, plus more heat shielding because you're going to be close to the sun. And it's not clear that from an engineering standpoint, it's actually better than taking the traditional route. So we're talking about 3 years away from Earth. Now, in 32 months, my crew of 6, and I want a crew of 6, if I send 2 people and lock them up in a closet-sized spacecraft for 3 years, they will kill each other. If I send 3 people, they'll gang up 2 on 1, and the 2 will kill the 1. If I send 4, they'll clique up 2 on 2 and kill each other. Nobody knows what will happen if I send 5, but 6, the psychologists tell us that's a pretty good size for a social environment that can survive 3 months in 33 months in isolation and confinement. So during our 32-month trip to Mars, 6 people are going to breathe up 9,000 scuba cylinders worth of oxygen, about 1,200 bottles worth of water, and 280 grocery carts full of food. And by the way, if you're going on a 32-month trip, I don't recommend the fresh bananas. They're not going to make it. So now the question is, what kind of vehicle will all that fit in? And the answer is we have one. It's called the International Space Station, weighing in at 240 tons with a crew of usually 7 these days, and enough supplies on board in case a couple of our cargo ships don't make it. They don't really have 3 years worth of supplies. They have about 1 year worth of supplies. But the International Space Station is a good kind of benchmark for the size of spacecraft you will need to go to Mars and back. If you saw the movie The Martian, the transfer ship they had looked a lot like the International Space Station. That's because they talked to experts about what a Mars ship would look like. And that's sort of what we're talking about. Just a reminder to launch the International Space Station, just to carry the pieces to orbit. This is not to rotate the crews in and out while we were building it. This is not to bring up consumable supplies or take home garbage. Just the pieces. Took 27 space shuttle launches, 2 big Russian Proton rockets and 2 smaller Russian Soyuz rockets to build that gigantic outpost in space. So if we build a Mars ship in orbit, that's what we're talking about, sort of 30 great big rocket launches to make that happen. Now we think we can get that mass down if we try. First of all, you can recycle things. You don't have to drink water, then go to the bathroom and throw that away. You can reprocess it and drink that water again. One of my friends, several times space station crew member, calls it turning yesterday's coffee into tomorrow's coffee. Kind of makes you squeamish, but it's better than bringing all that water. And another thing you can do is build your systems very, very reliably. The last 4 space shuttle missions to go to build the International Space Station carried gigantic pallets of unpressurized cargo, spare parts, big gyroscopes, tanks, batteries, things like that we knew could break in the future, and we weren't going to have any more space shuttles to bring up the big parts, so we brought up all those spare parts. If you can make systems that can function for decades with basically no chance for failing, you don't have to bring all those spares, and that makes the ship lighter. And oh, by the way, we have an International Space Station now where we are testing recycling our air and water, where we are testing growing plants for food, where we are testing systems to design future systems so that they will never break. So this is sort of our test bed in space for getting ready to build that Mars ship. And if you do all those things and do them very well, you can trim the mass of that Mars ship down to about 100 tons. And for you purists out there, that's the mass that completes the trans-Earth injection burn for returning to Earth. Now then, remember our picture from Apollo. Our 6-ton ship needed 3,350 tons of Saturn V rocket on the launch pad in order to send it to the moon and back. If our ship now weighs 100 tons, what's that launch vehicle going to look like? So you crunch the math out. Remember, it's a little bit more propellant to get to Mars and back, so the ratio is a little bit greater than it was for going to the moon. And the answer you get is 85,000 tons. And the good news is we have ships that size. The bad news is they don't fly, notwithstanding what you might have seen in that Avengers movie. We haven't figured out how to make a 85,000 ton ship fly. Now, 85,000 tons is a little asterisk fine print. It's a little petite for an aircraft carrier. The modern ones these days are more like 100,000 tons, but we're talking about a launch ship the size of an aircraft carrier. And just to put it in aerospace terms, that's about 39 space shuttle stacks, or about 25 Saturn stacks, to equal that mass on the launch pad. So we're talking about an awful lot of, of flying hardware to make this Mars ship and then send it all the way to Mars and back. Now, if we're clever about it, we think we can cut that down a little bit more. Upper left, that's a picture of our notional Space Launch System rocket future evolution. The bigger the pieces you throw, the less wasted mass there is. So you can trim that ratio down by having a very big rocket that you use. Upper right pictures from the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. That ship in science fiction was nuclear powered, and all that whining I did about chemical rockets and their limitations sort of goes away if you can use nuclear power. But nuclear power scares people. It's dangerous, and you would definitely need big reactors, and the exhaust might be a little bit radioactive, so I don't know if it's a good idea. But you can dramatically reduce your mass problem if you can get over the worries with nuclear power. Lower left picture is imagining staging parts of the ship in low Mars orbit while you're down on the surface. You don't have to take everything down to the surface and then back up. You can leave some stuff in orbit and save some weight that way. And then the lower right picture is a prototype that we actually built and tested on a volcano in Hawaii that turns dirt into rocket fuel. We're actually cracking the oxygen out of the oxides in the rocks that came out of that volcano to make oxygen that we can use for rocket propellant. And if you don't have to drag all your propellant to get back to Earth all the way to Mars and back, instead you can make some of that on Mars, you can reduce the size of your ship even further. All right, that was a lot of rocket science, but the thing that makes human spaceflight interesting is that it has humans in it. So let's talk about a little bit about what it takes for the people to fly to Mars and back for 3 years on a space mission. So first thing that happens when you get out of Earth's gravity and stop having to fight against it with your muscles for everything you do is your muscles say, fine, you're not using me, I'm out of here. There were terrible problems with astronauts and cosmonauts losing their muscle tone and muscle mass when they got into space because they just weren't using their muscles much. These days, however, we have an excellent weightlifting machine. Of course, lifting weights in zero-G is pointless. They don't weigh anything. So instead of weights, we use a cylinder of compressed air that the crew member pushes against to exercise their muscles. And we have a really good weightlifting machine, and our crews are coming back from 6 months in space just about as strong as they were when they launched. Another thing that happens when you get into space is your sense of balance, which figures out where down is using some very complicated tiny equipment in your middle ear. As soon as the gravity turns off, that system stops working. Your body responds to that by saying, oh, don't know where down is. I think I better throw up. I don't know what committee designed that system, but that's the way it works. So whenever anybody goes into space, they spend the first couple of days either throwing up or having stomach awareness, like when you know you're going to throw up, or fibbing about it. So those are the three categories. The good news is if you are a couch potato and just don't try to do too much while you're feeling nauseated, after a few days, the system rewires itself and you feel better. And then you're up in space and you can do all those backflips and float around upside down and have a great old time. And then when you return to gravity, of course, the same thing happens in reverse. And a lot of people feel queasy for the first few days. Just don't try to do too much and you're going to be okay. So keep your schedule light on launch day and landing day and a couple of days after that. So we think that problem will solve itself and we don't need to worry about it. Next, I mentioned it before, there's radiation in space. The sun emits dangerous radiation, and astrophysical sources, black holes, neutron stars, things out in space emit radiation that is harmful to us. We don't like radiation, and unfortunately, the one thing guaranteed to block radiation is mass, such as these lead bricks. The one thing that we cannot afford to launch and drag to Mars and back is mass. So we kind of have a problem. Now, the radiation dose you would get going to and from Mars is more than NASA currently allows administratively for an astronaut to get because of the risk of cancer later in life. But if we had to waive that requirement and we asked the astronaut office who wants to go to Mars, every single hand would go up. We also have the potential of hiding amongst our water bottles, as this gentleman is doing in this picture, although if those bottles were full, he wouldn't be able to walk with it. We have to carry substantial stores of water with us to and from Mars, and it turns out water is a great radiation shield. So if you sort of build a fort out of your water bags, and if there's an outburst on the sun, increased radiation, you can go hide amongst your water bottles for a few days, and that will absorb most of the radiation, and you can reduce your dose. So this problem isn't totally solved, but we think it's solved well enough for us to take the risk of sending people to Mars and back without more danger from radiation than the other sources of danger on such a long trip. Next, just like your muscles, your bones, if you don't use them, will leave you. In the early days of the Soviet space program, when they were flying people on space stations for long duration, some of their 40-year-old test pilots came back with bones like an 80-year-old osteoporotic patient. So this is a serious deficiency. And we've been working long and hard to figure out how to keep our astronauts from having legs that would break as soon as you got to Mars, which would be embarrassing. And the answer turns out to be just do a lot more exercise. This is a picture of my classmate Sonny Williams on the treadmill up on the International Space Station. So with the treadmill and the weightlifting together, most crew members are coming back from station without bone loss. Some do have bone loss. Of those, most of them, once they get back under gravity and start exercising again, get most of their bone back, but some of them don't. So this problem is, again, mostly solved, is solved well enough for us to go to Mars, but it's not completely licked yet, and we're still working on it. Now, if you take a small group of people and you isolate them away from friends and family, confine them together in a very limited habitat, and put them under a lot of stress for 3 years, there's a possibility that that might not go well. And one of my favorite shots from the movie The Shining. Psychological problems are possible, and we don't fully know how to be completely confident that we will solve that problem in time for people to go to Mars. The good news is there are accounts from the early history of polar exploration 100 years ago and more, early 1900s, late 1800s, where tiny groups were trapped together under horrendous conditions, far worse than a spaceship, for months and months on end of freezing darkness, and they didn't kill each other. So not completely solved, but probably solved well enough for us to go to Mars. Finally, when we started sending crews to space station for long durations, a lot of them came back with kind of bad eyesight. Now, for a while, we thought, we're sending people in their 40s. That's about the age when you start needing reading glasses. It's probably that. And then we found out later, no, actually, when you get into space, your body cranks up the pressure in your cerebrospinal fluid that bathes your spine and brain. And there's a concomitant increase in the pressure in the fluid inside your eyeball. And this is actually damaging people's eyes. And we had no idea. When we asked the Russians about this, they'd started flying space stations earlier, in the 1970s. And they said, oh, da, мы знали about them. Oh, yeah, we knew about that. Well, why didn't you tell us? Anyway, we don't know why this is happening, and we're not quite sure what to do about it. So this was a surprise. It's not solved yet. And we'd really hate to send a crew to Mars and have them land and not being able to read their checklists. However, we have an International Space Station, which is an orbiting laboratory. And many of the most important experiments going on are using the crew members as subjects. And we are studying this problem with some of the finest minds in medical science today. And I am confident that we will find an answer before we have to send our crews to Mars. All right, that was an earful. By now, you should all be certified rocket scientists, or if you prefer, a more modern role model. This is David Newman. She was the deputy administrator of NASA for many years, and she was also a spacesuit designer at MIT. And with that, let's go to Mars. And that is the end of my presentation.
Everyone, let's give astronaut Stan Love a great big round of applause. What an incredible presentation. I just learned so much.
Good. Wow, the idea was for everybody to be rocket scientists.
I feel like I'm ready to go.
All right.
Like I know exactly how to do it. But also now I know why this presentation is called Why Mars is Hard.
Yep. There are a lot of challenges ahead of us. I have no doubt that we can do it, but I don't think we're quite ready to go today.
Probably not, which is interesting because going to Mars is such a staple in media and on the news and on the internet, people talking about it and trying to figure out ways to do it. It almost sounds like it could happen any day now, but it looks like it's a little more complicated than that.
It is not very complicated. I mentioned the movie The Martian. The science in that is actually quite good. The science in the book is even better. So if you want to get a clear and entertaining idea, I recommend taking a look at that. It's one of the best representations in media for what a mission like that would actually be like. And there are many very bad depictions in media of what that mission would be like.
Lots of bad ones. Well, for all of our viewers, let me remind you that we're going to take your questions now. So if you've got thoughts and questions, type them up into the chat on YouTube and here in Zoom, and the moderators are taking those and sending them straight to me right here so that we can make this a whole big conversation with Dr. Love. So the first question that came in early in the presentation, I think came in right when you were introduced as having been into space. Is it cool to float around in zero gravity?
It's totally cool to float around in zero gravity after 3 or 4 days. So if you ever sign up for one of those space tours flights, don't sign up for a 4-day mission because you're going to feel lousy for those first few days, and then it's going to be time to land. So go for like a week or go for only a few minutes on one of those suborbital hops, and then you can float around and have fun. So it's like floating underwater in a swimming pool, except if you turn upside down, you don't get water in your nose. And you don't have to hold your breath. That sounds
amazing.
It is totally amazing, and everybody loves it.
I've always seen pictures, videos of people who go on the suborbital flights. The planes that go up and down in these huge trajectories.
And the vomit comet.
The vomit comets, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And they look like they're having the best time. And they're not even really making it all the way up into space yet.
Yep. No, it's a wonderful experience, and I hope more people get a chance to experience. If you do go on the vomit comet, by the way, take the anti-nausea medications. For me, without medication, I get about 15 parabolas, and then I'm sitting in the back wishing I was dead.
Mental note.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question that came in is about rockets. Aaron wanted to know, what is the biggest rocket booster?
The biggest rocket booster in history was the Russian N-1 moon rocket. So while the Apollo program was going and getting ready to go to the moon, we were still racing with the Russians, and they were racing desperately to build a rocket that was big enough. So that thing had a liftoff thrust of about 10 million pounds. Saturn V liftoff thrust about 7.5 million pounds. So the N-1 is the biggest booster that's ever flown. But none of them flew very far, unfortunately. They had one blow up on the launch pad and 2 blow ups shortly after launch. The Space Shuttle also had about 7.5 million pounds of liftoff thrust. That new SLS rocket, when it launches in a couple months, 8.8 million pounds of liftoff thrust. Wild horses could not prevent me from being at that launch. I'm totally going to be there. It's going to be awesome. And SpaceX is working on their super heavy booster, which is like 16 or 17 million pounds of liftoff thrust. That hasn't flown yet. Rumors are it will fly soon. I look forward to seeing that. And that's going to be a pretty impressive booster as well.
There you go. Now talking about propulsion systems and rocket engines, Cynthia wanted to know, couldn't we use nuclear pulse propulsion or an NSWR? I don't even know what that means.
Well, nuclear pulse. So first of all, you don't want to launch with nuclear propulsion for reasons that have already been mentioned. You leave a gigantic radioactive cloud, and the neighbors call you, and they're not happy with you. Once in space, so nuclear pulse basically means you build a spaceship that has a gigantic and very durable steel plate in the back of it, and you squirt atomic bombs out the back and light them off in front of that plate, and the blast pushes you along in space. So you're going poop, 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 and each of those poops is an atomic bomb. Works great. If you want to go to Jupiter in a couple of months, go for it. But man, that's a lot of atomic bombs. That concept is called Project Orion, actually, and you can read a lot about it on the internet if you like. I was championed by a physicist named Freeman Dyson, who is a hero and role model of mine. And that kind of propulsion system might even be suitable for sending payloads to other stars. You probably wouldn't be able to slow down when you got there, and it would still take a long time to get there. But it's very efficient. But people get ginchy when you light off even one atomic bomb. And if you do it too close to the Earth, like in space, you load up the Van Allen belts with charged particles, and every satellite going around Earth gets creamed by the radiation. So it's messy, and you'll have a public outcry when you try to launch things with atomic bombs, even if you're just carrying the bombs into space and then start lighting them off when you get there. And I'm not familiar with that 4-letter acronym, so I can't answer it.
All right. Let's see. Annika writes, how large of a window is there to leave Mars at the right time to return to Earth? Are we talking hours, days, or weeks?
Okay, so the launch windows for sending stuff to Mars from Earth or vice versa are about 2 weeks long. If you launch outside that 2-week window, you can still do it, but it costs you extra propellant, which in most cases you can't afford. So you have a couple of weeks to get it right.
Okay, little. If the weather's not just right,
there's a little wiggle room for you.
That's good. That's good. And Annika had another question, and I had this question too. You talked about using water on the spacecraft in order to absorb radiation from space to protect you. Can you still drink the water?
Absolutely. Absorbing radiation doesn't make a thing radioactive. That's a common misconception. And actually, I remember seeing that in the dramatization of the Chernobyl accident. If a person takes a terrible dose of radiation, once you get them into clean clothes, get their clothes off, get them showered, get all the radioactive material off of them, unless they have eaten the dirt that's radioactive, they themselves are not radioactive. So the water acts like a sandbag stopping bullets, where the bullets are the radiation, and there's no change really to the sand itself. So the water is perfectly all right. It does not become radioactive just because it has blocked or deflected the charged particles that make radiation.
And then you just gotta not drink it all for the return trip.
Correct. You need to save some for the return trip. But again, you'll be cycling the water multiple times.
You're right. Coffee in, coffee out.
Coffee in, coffee out. Yes.
All right. Let's see here. Ooh, a good one from Diane. What is done to prevent spreading our diseases, or maybe spreading things from Earth onto other planets?
Okay, first of all, there is no thing on Earth that can survive and reproduce in any place in space, period. There's no biosphere on Mars. There's no biosphere on the moon that we could get germs into. Now, it's possible that deep underground in Mars, where it's warmer and wetter, there's an environment where Earth germs could live. But right now, space is just not good for things. There are viruses, bacteria, and small animals called tardigrades that can survive in space for quite some time. However, they can't move, grow, reproduce under those conditions. So for the moon, Actually, when the Apollo astronauts went to the moon, the worry was they were going to bring germs back from the moon that was going to kill off everything on Earth. If you've seen the movie The Andromeda Strain, that's sort of what that's about. But whenever we get materials from the moon, from Mars, meteorites, and examine them carefully, we never find anything alive. We find some of the basic building blocks of life, but nothing alive. So the only thing you can spread Earth germs to right now in space is your crewmates. Whenever we launch a crew to the space station, we want to make sure they don't take the flu up there with them. So we put them in quarantine for 2 weeks before they launch. Coming back from space, it's not a problem, although your immune system may be weakened because you've been under stress for a long time and you've been sort of in a germ-free environment for a long time. So you're probably going to get a cold when you come back. For payloads that go to Mars, where there is the possibility of a viable biosphere somewhere, likely again deep underground, we sterilize our spacecraft very thoroughly. When we send people there, that's actually going to be a big deal. All space suits and spaceships leak. They're not perfectly airtight, so we would be leaking air and we leaking bacteria with it. And figuring out how we can do that and not poison or accidentally replace a alien Martian biosphere is a big deal, right? For now, we're just sending smaller rovers and landers, and we can put those in an autoclave and sterilize them before we launch, and we do that. There's also the possibility that a potential viable Martian biosphere deep underground could have germs that could hitchhike back to Earth, and that also is a scary deal. And there are teams working on these problems right now to make sure that we have good answers before we send people. That is a very good question, and it's a topic for much current study and discussion.
Isn't there's like an office at NASA or a position of someone who's
Office of Planetary Protection.
Planetary protection.
Yep. And it's a concern also for the outer planets now, the radiation environment, the cold, the poisonous atmospheres. The big outer planets are probably not teeming with life, but both Saturn and Jupiter have moons, which are covered with ice, which appear from sort of secondary evidence to have liquid oceans underneath. And whenever we send a spacecraft out there, when it's done with its mission, we actually crash it onto the main planet so that it won't accidentally crash into one of those moons and potentially poison a biosphere that's going on in a sub-ice ocean on one of those moons. So we intentionally ditch those spacecraft onto the planet itself so that they won't contaminate the moons.
Okay, good thinking. Smart. What I come to expect from NASA. Okay,
we really do our best.
Yeah. Okay. Earlier we talked about, or briefly mentioned Artemis, and in the bio it said you were working on the Orion capsule as well. So there's a good question: how will Artemis help us get to Mars?
So Artemis right now is focused on the moon. As I hope I made clear in my talk, physics makes Mars 1,000 times harder than the moon, and we can't even get to the moon reliably with people right now. So that is the step we must take before we're really going to Mars. Now, as we learn more about spaceships, as we make better engines, once we have a regular traffic to and from the moon, we hope to build a base on the moon that might be similar to bases we have in Antarctica today. And those are places we can learn more about isolation and confinement, about recycling our water and air. We're also planned to build sort of a transit station in orbit around the moon to facilitate things going there, coming back, refueling in space in orbit around the moon. That's called the Gateway. That will also be sort of a benchmark for studying how to do things on Mars. Landing on the moon, because Mars' atmosphere is so thin, landing on the moon is a lot like landing on Mars, like landing a helicopter in the wilderness somewhere and hope you don't hit a boulder. So there are many problems for Mars that we can study on the moon. There are some of the big ones, though. Slowing a 40-ton payload down from interplanetary speeds using the Martian atmosphere for friction. We're going to have to do that at Mars. So we can't solve all of the problems for Mars using the moon, but we can get a start on solving many of them And, we're going to write down everything we learn, and we'll be able to apply it to Mars. Furthermore, the Gateway station is actually designed someday to be mobile. We could send it away from its orbit around the moon. We could send it out to deep space to a Earth-Sun Lagrange point. We could send it out and have a near-Earth asteroid fly by it. We could put it into polar orbit around the Earth at the moon's distance so that you could look down, straight down on the north and south poles of the Earth. There's a lot of missions we could do with that are sort of baby steps towards the long stride that we would need to get to Mars.
That kind of feeds into another question that came up from Dennis. Do you think it might be feasible to space out several spaceships on Earth-Mars transfer orbits so you could catch one there, catch another back, instead of trying to take the one trip on the one spacecraft?
So that's been talked about, but the only thing more expensive than one Mars transfer ship is a whole bunch of them. And to be assured that there would be one within reach of the planet at any moment you chose, you would need thousands. Now you can build one ship that is on a special orbit that does gravitational slingshot maneuvers past Mars every time it passes and past Earth every time it passes. This is called a cycler. And you would build one ship and have it do these gravity assists to modify its orbit every single time. The transits between planets would be longer, and the amount of speed you'd have to gain to meet the cycler when you launched off the planet to get to it, and the amount of speed you'd have to kill off to get off the cycler and down to the planet, because the orbit is not perfectly optimized for low speed the way the one that I showed you is. There'd be disadvantages there, but then that cycler you could grab a near-Earth asteroid and mine it for radiation shielding mass. Just make a big pile of rocks and hide in the middle of that. And then you wouldn't have to keep accelerating and decelerating that mass using engines. So there may be an advantage there. Studies that have looked at that find, again, as with the doing the Venus swing by to save a little bit of time, from an engineering standpoint, it's kind of a wash. It's not a home run.
Okay.
Okay. Buzz Aldrin, one of the lunar astronauts, has been a big proponent of Mars cyclers. If you want to read more.
Oh, okay. Excellent question there. All right. Next one here. Ooh, this is a good one from Glenn. Now you mentioned turning dirt into fuel. What about getting water from the Martian surface?
So water is even better. Water is hydrogen and oxygen. You can invest electricity to split it apart into those two components, and then you can burn the hydrogen with the oxygen, and it makes the best rocket propellant. So that is a great idea. In fact, you can collect water from the Martian air. Interesting fact, the humidity on Mars is 100% all the time. Now the air is so thin that the actual amount of water vapor is minuscule, but the Martian atmosphere actually carries as much water as it possibly can at that low temperature and low density. And of course, Mars has polar caps. Those are mostly carbon dioxide ice, but we are quite sure that Mars has a lot of water ice frozen in those polar caps, and also frozen in the soil as permafrost. And that is actually the resource we're most interested in on Mars. And it's also the resource we're most interested in on the moon. The moon's seasons, like on Earth, the seasons on the moon are very subtle because the tilt of the moon with respect to its path around the sun is only 1 degree, where it's 23 degrees on the Earth. That's what causes the seasons. But that tiny little tilt means there are craters at the north and south pole of the moon where the sun never shines. And the temperature down there is about 40 degrees Kelvin above absolute zero. And whenever an asteroid with some content of water or a comet nucleus hits the moon, all that water gets liberated, and it bounces. The water molecules bounce around the moon like super balls, because the atmosphere on the moon, there is one, and it's so thin that the molecules don't hit each other. They hit the ground, and then they bounce another 50 miles and hit the ground again. And when one of those molecules bounces into one of those super cold craters, it freezes there and sticks. And this has been going on for 4.5 billion years. And radar studies have shown reflective areas that look like there's frost mixed in with the dirt at the lunar poles. And that is worth 100 times its weight in gold on the moon if you don't have to drag it from Earth. So we're very interested in using those resources on the moon. And that is another technology that we can prove out on the moon that will be very valuable for Mars.
Very interesting. Seasons on the moon. I had not heard that before.
Every object in the solar system has an axial tilt compared to its orbit around the sun, and that's what creates the seasons. And it turns out that the moon, the Earth is tipped 23 degrees, the moon's orbit is tipped like 28, and when you add it all together, the moon's axial tilt is 1 degree, which makes for very tiny differences between summer and winter.
Very, very interesting. All right, now some of the questions that are coming in now, folks are kind of curious about what it takes to become an astronaut, the training, what's the hardest part about training to become an astronaut, and kind of the education that it takes.
Well, the hardest, once you're in, the training is challenging but manageable. The hard part is getting selected. Our last astronaut selection, we had 18,000 applicants, and we hired 10.
Whoa.
The odds weren't as bad when I got in. I probably wouldn't have got selected if I had to go in the last batch. So the basics are you have to either be a test pilot or have a master's degree in a technical scientific field, and be reasonably healthy. But because we have so many applicants and because the astronaut job has so many different facets, if you want your resume to be near the top, you need to have, say, that master's degree. I came in through the academic path, so that master's degree and a couple of years of experience. You need to have done something risky and technical, such as scuba diving, airplane, mountaineering, something like that, where your teammates and your equipment are vital to your survival. It helps if you've done team sports. The most important aspect for becoming an astronaut is teamwork. It is not, being an Ironman athlete. It's teamwork. That's what makes everything work at NASA. You need to be able to speak foreign languages. You need experience overseas because we work with our international partners. You need experience in public speaking or teaching because a lot of what we do, as I'm doing today, speaking to audiences, non-technical audiences about spaceflight, that's a part of our job. It helps if you've had a lot of experience taking things apart and putting them back together again so they work, because that is a big part of what we do all the time on space station. It helps if you've been doing field work, like on a submarine or shipboard or in Antarctica, harsh conditions, tough living conditions, weird food, not enough sleep, can't take a bath, and you still get along with your teammates pretty well under those conditions, and you're able to make your equipment work. So it takes a wide range of skills, but specifically focused on teamwork and leadership, and then on being able to function with equipment in difficult situations if you want your resume to get up to the top of that pile.
There you go. There you go. Now, does going to space camp when you're 11 years old count?
No.
No? All right. Well,
no.
I'll keep my job here at the museum then.
It shows that you have interest in space, but all 18,000 of those people have interest in space.
Of course they do.
If I'm looking at resumes, and because I'm a physical scientist, they split out the resumes according to sort of educational background. Things that I personally give a gold star for are Eagle Scout, shows practical skills, leadership, teamwork. Duty in Antarctica. I've been to Antarctica twice, and it is a very good model for being in space. And then because my background didn't have any team sports in it, and as a scientist being trained in science, we are not super good at working in teams in astronomy. It's kind of you and your advisor. Those were areas that I had challenges shoring up my skill set when I got here. So I look for scientists who have had that kind of teamwork and leadership experience, because they will have a leg up that I did not when I came here.
Okay. Now, let's see here. If you personally were able to go to Mars, what's the first research project you're doing?
I'm not doing research, period, end of sentence. Astronauts do not design experiments the way scientists do. We operate the equipment, we keep ourselves healthy, and for some fraction of the time, we operate investigations that other people have designed. So we don't come up with our own experiments and do them in space. We are doing peer-reviewed stuff. Only a tiny fraction of the research that people want to do in space can get done. And astronauts don't have the privilege of saying, yeah, no, I'm not going to do yours today, even though you spent 10 years working on it. I'm going to do my own thing. Now, if I went to Mars, the things I would be most interested in are the geology and the possibility for biology. So those are experiments that are definitely going to happen. My background is not just astronomy, but planetary scientist. I'm interested in geology. And the field work that I've done on Earth has been geologically focused. I'm not an expert in it, but I like it. So I would be very excited to help out with those geological experimentations. You know, if there was, say, a medical experiment, I might be less excited to help, but I would do it because it's my job. But the geology and biology to me would be the most fascinating, and I would do it just like the other stuff, but I would be more happy and excited about it.
Of course. Now, R has a really great question. You talked about the tension that can arise between people in tight spaces in long periods of time. So do you think NASA would want to send like a therapist on the trip too?
No, because that therapist would have to pull their weight rebuilding things when they break, landing rocket ships, doing spacewalks. So we can't send specialists. And we especially can't send specialists who are focused in fields that don't have to do with the equipment and the operation. What we would do is we would put our potential crewmates, on an Antarctic winter rover, on a submarine, out in a remote field site, and give them opportunities to work together. We would screen the whole office and find the people who were not just the best in their field at what they do, but also the nicest people and easiest to get along with, the ones who, when everything is going wrong and they're feeling ill and their experiment broke, they're still centered and easy to get along with and don't take it out on their crewmates. And that's not going to be everybody. Not everybody has that kind of mental resilience. However, it's trainable. If I could go back and talk to Stan at age 15, my one message would be social skills are trainable. You don't just either have them or you don't. You can learn them. So we would do our best to teach everybody the best possible leadership and teamwork skills for getting along under those conditions. And then we would select to go to Mars the people who were best at that. Then finally, at least when you're close to Earth and you can have a two-way conversation via radio without a lot of time delay, you can talk to a therapist. Once you're far away, you can send messages to and from, like text messaging or email to a therapist. And then when your only resource is your crewmates, they become your therapists, even if they don't have specific training. If something's bothering you, say, you're out in deep space and at home, your child is ill. Who do you have but your teammates to turn to? So you would talk to them, and that will help you cope with whatever it is you're coping with. You'll get sympathy, you'll get support, because they know that tomorrow it may be their kid that's sick and you that's supporting them.
Right. I mean, that's so critical, right? It's the technical skills, working together. I mean, we need that in our everyday lives anyway.
We do. If I ever return to science, the thing I will want to bring with me to that community is leadership and teamwork. Every PhD scientist has a bad advisor story. And that does not have to be. That absolutely does not have to be. We could work together as scientists far better, and we would enjoy our careers more, and we would do more and better science if we were to bring that into our scope. But right now, that is generally just not emphasized in science. It's the technical ability that's emphasized more. But I think if we broadened our scope just a little bit, we would be happier and more productive as a community.
Excellent stuff. We've got a couple of minutes left here, but I'm kind of curious myself. You've flown on the shuttles. You've studied meteorites in Antarctica, but come Monday morning, you've got to get up and go to the office. What's going to be on your desk? Like, what now, after all these accolades, NASA astronaut, and all these great projects, like, what's the thing you're going to open your computer up Monday morning and start working on?
Let's see, I'm going to open up my computer. I'll have 40 emails waiting for me, 38 of which are work spam and useless to me. So delete, 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 delete. Control D is my favorite key. There will be a couple. Let's see, I expect to, we'll be talking about displays and controls for the new lunar lander. NASA is working with SpaceX on that. NASA has their ideas about how to do things. SpaceX has their own ideas about how to do things. And since they're frequently more efficient than NASA, they think their ideas are better, but we have a lot more experience. So there's an exciting conversation to be had about displays and controls for the lander. We'll be getting a briefing. We recently had a mishap in one of our aircraft for training. An important piece of equipment failed, and the whole fleet was grounded for a week and a half. And we are getting ready to go back to flying. So I'll be interested to hear the technical details, the rationale for why we think it's safe to start flying again. Let's see. There will be a lengthy meeting in the afternoon where we're talking about all the details for the Artemis 1 mission. That's the mission without crew that's going to fly around the moon here in a couple of months. I and my fellow Capcoms for Artemis 2, which will have the crew on board, Artemis 1 is unpiloted, will be sitting in mission control at our Capcom console for training purposes, so that when we fly Artemis 2, we're not wet behind the ears and don't have the faintest idea what's going on. So I'll be listening into that meeting to help prepare myself to sit on console for a mission with no crew on board, where I'll never make a radio call, but I still have to learn all the systems on board the spacecraft so that if something breaks, I can explain to the crew exactly what's wrong, exactly what they have to do in the minimum amount of syllables so they can't possibly get it wrong and do the wrong thing. And when my thumb comes off the microphone, the main message that they have to get from mission control, from me personally as their Capcom, is, we love you. As soon as a crew in space gets the idea that the ground team is not behind them 100%, as soon as that mental barrier starts coming up, the mission is in danger. And so it's my job as a Capcom to keep the crews in space and the team on Earth functioning perfectly as a team. And that is a skill that takes practice. Just a little nuance in the voice you hear coming down from the crew. Capcom has to pay attention to that and say, ooh, flight director, hey, flight, the crew's sounding fatigued. Can we pull some of their activities off of today and maybe put them on to tomorrow so they can get some rest? That's an important part of the Capcom job, being the representative of the crew. I take it seriously, and knowing how to do all parts of that job is exciting to me, and I'm going to be getting ready to do some of that on Monday. Also on Mondays, that's one of my gym days, so I'll go into the gym, lift some weights to stay healthy. Although I am older than the average astronaut these days, I'm still doing training runs in the neutral buoyancy lab in the real spacesuit underwater in the swimming pool. That suit is very physically demanding, so I try to stay strong so that I can continue to function in the suit. Every day in the astronaut office, there's something new and exciting. It's never the same day twice. I get to work on a very wide range of things. And I've been in this job for 23 years now. I love it. They're going to have to carry me out feet first.
I love that. That's incredible. What a job to have. I'm jealous. I'm just going to say it. I'm very jealous.
Well, you got to apply, man.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm pretty fortunate here at the Museum of Natural Sciences because I get to do things like have conversations with folks like you. So, astronaut Stan Love, thank you for being here today.
You're so welcome. This has been a blast. I hope you enjoyed the talk. And I am sorry I couldn't be there in person, but if you do this again in the future, there is one astronaut who's an astronomer, and I would be happy to come for an astronomy day.
Thank you, Stan. Can I just say thank you? That was so exciting. That was such a great talk. Thank you for doing it.
You're welcome.
Hope to meet you in person soon.
Hope so too.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Stan. And hey, thanks to all of you who tuned in to today's program. I know that you enjoyed it because I had a blast with today's presentation. Don't forget, we've got more great Astronomy Days programs coming up the rest of today and tomorrow on all things space, astronomy, and astrophysics. So I hope that we'll see you at another program. Check out naturalsciences.org/astrodays to see the full schedule of events for the remaining programs. Make sure too that while you're there, you can find links to pick up an Astronomy Days t-shirt. We've got a great Venus design on the shirt this year. And I want to say a special thank you to this year's sponsors, North Carolina Space Grant and Pepsi, for bringing all these programs together, and the Raleigh Astronomy Club for being close partners, and to NASA for working with us to bring Stan to us today. Everybody, thanks. Take care. Stay safe. Keep your community safe. We'll see you again real soon. Bye, folks.
Bye. Thank you.